A 911 dispatcher called me back about an emergency that I hadn't reported yet. This is Scared with Jess, and today's story is about the call that came from inside my house while I was still driving home. It happened a little after 10 on a Thursday night. I had stayed late at work and was about 15 minutes home from when my phone rang through my car speakers. The number came up as emergency services, so I answered immediately. A woman asked if I was safe, and I thought she had the wrong number, so I told her I was driving and asked what was happening. She said, "We received a disconnected 911 call from this number." I looked at my phone sitting in the cup holder. I hadn't touched it since leaving work. I told her I never called. She asked me to confirm my name and address, and then she said, "The caller reported that someone was inside your home." I nearly missed my turn. I asked what caller she was talking about. The dispatcher said a woman had whispered into the phone for about 20 seconds before the call disconnected. The woman gave me my full address, and she also gave my name. I told the dispatcher I lived alone and wasn't home yet. And there was a pause, and then she told me not to go inside. 2 officers were already on their way. I pulled into a gas station about a mile from my house and waited. The dispatcher stayed on the phone with me, and I asked whether the call could have come from another number, and she said no. It came from mine. I checked my recent calls while she was talking, and there was no outgoing call to 911. The dispatcher asked whether anyone else had access to my phone account, and I said no. And then she asked, "Is there another phone inside your house?" I had an old cell phone in a kitchen drawer, but it wasn't connected to a service plan. She said emergency calls could sometimes still go through from disconnected phones. That explanation made me feel slightly better. Maybe the old phone had malfunctioned somehow. Maybe someone had accidentally triggered it months ago and the account information was still attached to my name. And then the dispatcher said, "The caller was speaking in your voice." I stopped breathing for a second. I asked how she could possibly know that. And she said they record all emergency calls, and the woman had said my name several times. The dispatcher had just heard me speaking long enough to recognize the similarity. I told her people's voices can sound alike over the phone, and she agreed, but she didn't sound convinced. The officers arrived at my house before I did, and they told me to remain at the gas station until they cleared it. I sat there with the engine running, staring at the road that led back to my neighborhood. About 10 minutes later, an officer called and said the house was empty. All the doors were locked and the windows were closed, and nothing appeared disturbed. He asked me to meet them outside, and when I arrived, both officers were standing in my driveway. One of them checked my identification and walked through the house with me. Nothing was missing, my bedroom looked normal, and the back door was still locked from the inside. The old phone was exactly where I remembered leaving it, dead in the kitchen drawer. One officer plugged it into a charger and it wouldn't turn on. I asked if they could listen to the emergency call, and they said the dispatcher was sending the recording. We waited in the kitchen until it arrived, and the officer played it from his phone. At first there was only breathing, and then a woman whispered, "There's someone in my house." It sounded like me, not vaguely similar. It was my voice. The same light rasp I get when I'm trying to speak quietly. The dispatcher on the recording asked whether the caller was hiding, and the woman said, "In the bedroom closet." I looked down the hallway toward my bedroom, and the dispatcher asked if she could see the intruder, and my voice answered, "No, I can hear him walking." In the background, footsteps moved slowly across the hardwood floor. My house had hardwood floors. The footsteps stopped, and then my voice whispered, "He's outside the closet now." The call ended, and no one said anything for a few seconds. One officer checked my bedroom closet again, and it was empty. He told me someone might have spoofed my number and played a recording of my voice. I asked how anyone knew the layout of my house. He said they could have found pictures online, but I had never posted pictures of the inside. And then the other officer noticed the timestamp. The emergency call had been placed at 10:47 p.m. I looked at the clock on my oven, and it was 10:39. The officer checked his phone, the same time. The call was time-stamped 8 minutes in the future. They assumed it was a system error. One of them called dispatch to confirm, but while he was speaking, my phone screen lit up on the counter. The emergency keypad opened by itself, and I watched the numbers 911 appear. And then the call button pressed. I grabbed the phone, but the call had already started. The dispatcher answered, and at the same moment, my ringtone began playing somewhere inside the house. Not from the phone in my hand, but from down the hallway. The officers heard it too, and one of them drew his weapon and motioned for me to stay in the kitchen. The ringtone kept playing from my bedroom. They moved down the hall and searched again, and there was no phone inside, no speaker, nothing. The ringtone stopped, and then a woman began speaking through the call on my phone. My voice, very quiet. "There's someone in the house." It was the beginning of the recording we had already heard. The dispatcher asked for the address, and my voice gave it. I realized we were listening to a copy. The call from 8 minutes in the future was happening now. One officer whispered for me to hang up. Before I could, the woman on the line said, "I'm in the bedroom closet." Both officers were standing in my bedroom doorway, and the closet door was closed. One of them slowly opened it, but it was empty. And then the voice on my phone whispered, "He knows I'm outside now." Something knocked 3 times on the front door behind me, and I turned around. Through the small window beside the door, I saw someone standing on the porch. A woman, same height as me and the same hair, and she was wearing the coat I had on. Her face was turned away, but she had a phone pressed to her ear. The officer shouted for her to show her hands, and she slowly turned toward the window. Before I could see her face, the porch light went out. The officers opened the door, and no one was there. The streetlight was empty, and the call on my phone had disconnected. I left that night, and the officers stayed while I packed a bag, and I slept at a hotel across town. I moved out before the end of the month, and I never received another call from 911, and I never found out who was hiding in my closet. Anyway, good luck sleeping tonight.
You get scared easily, now is the time to scroll. The title of this scary story submission is Southern Colorado Skinwalker Story. This is actually a submission from somebody that I personally know in my life. I will just be completely honest, I was not expecting a story like this to be in my inbox from her. It is so terrifying, so let's get into it. She didn't specify whether or not she wanted to remain anonymous, so I'm just going to call her Abby for the sake of this video. Abby and 3 other friends decided to go on a camping/hiking venture trip from southern Colorado and make their way up to northern Colorado. It says that her and her 3 friends were about to hit their first campsite. They're about an hour or 2 out. Abby was driving the last leg until they hit their first campsite, and as she was doing so, the sun was dipping behind the mountains. Something important to note is if you've never driven in rural Colorado, there are not a ton of streetlights on the roads, so it can get pretty scary pretty quickly, especially when you're driving. Everyone was pretty quiet because it had been a long day of travel. They were ready to get to the campsite. As it's getting darker, Abby keeps looking back in the rearview mirror and suddenly sees this like fox coyote animal. Since they're driving, she can't really tell what it is as they're going away. What's really weird is this animal was like staring at the car. Abby glances back at the road, and as she glances back up, this animal is now standing on its hind legs. This would weird anyone out, so she says, "What the heck?" Everybody in the car wakes up, asks what's wrong. Abby looks back in the rearview mirror again for a 3rd time, and the animal is gone. At this point, she thinks that the tiredness is getting to her, exhaustion setting in. So she just says, "I saw an animal doing weird things, and I think we should switch drivers." Abby's friend drives the rest of the way to the campsite. Once they're there, they set up 2 different tents, one that Abby and friend 1 slept in, and the other tent friend 2 and friend 3 slept in. Anyways, the 4 of them sleep through the night, wake up the next morning. As they're packing up the site, friend 2 asks Abby if she had gotten up in the middle of the night and left her tent. Specifically says, "I heard you asking for help, and specifically if I could leave my tent to help you." Abby obviously says, "No, I didn't leave the tent at all." And friend 1 vouches for Abby since she was staying in the same tent and said no, she didn't get up in the middle of the night. Friend 3, the one who had been sharing the tent that was being spoken to, says that she didn't hear anything, and it was probably because she slept very, very hard. They didn't open the tent. They didn't go help whoever was out there or whatever was out there. That's when Abby opens up to the group about what she actually saw the animal doing. She left the overall group feeling pretty uneasy in the campsite. Really, they were only staying there for 1 night, so they just packed everything up, did their climb, and then drove to the second campsite, and didn't have any problems the rest of the trip. Abby says prior to this trip, she had no knowledge about skinwalkers or wendigos or anything like that, but after this trip, when she was at home with her dad watching the History Channel, they were doing a segment on skinwalkers. She was just sitting there appalled that something was lining up so well with her experiences in southern Colorado. the end of her email, Abby says that she thinks it's kind of like a rite of passage to have a scary story being a granola girl. I would have to agree. All the friends that I have that do outdoorsy things have like the most horrific stories. I don't know if you just saw that light flicker, but okay. Anyways, that's gonna do it for me. Stay tuned for my ghost stories.
Another scary story submission was sent to me via email. This is your time. If you don't like scary things, you don't like paranormal, to go ahead and scroll. Let's get into reading the email. The email reads, "Hi Casey, I've almost sent this to you probably 5 times. I always backed out. If you share it, please keep my actual name anonymous. Just call me Megan. This happened in Stillwater, Minnesota. 2021, my husband and I moved into an older house with our 4-year-old daughter, who I'll call Sophie. I'm not really somebody who believed in ghosts before this. A couple weeks after moving in, Sophie started talking about the wet lady. At first, we assumed it was an imaginary friend, but occasionally say things like, the wet lady was in the hallway last night, or the wet lady doesn't like when daddy closes my door. I asked her why she called her that, and she said, because her hair drips in her dress. Obviously creepy, but kids do say weird things. Then one night around 2 a.m., I woke up to Sophie standing next to my bed. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I asked what was wrong, and she whispered, she won't stop looking in my room. I brought Sophie into our bed, and eventually we all fell back asleep. The next morning, I went into her bedroom, and the carpet directly outside of her doorway was wet. Not damp, wet. There were little ring marks through it that looked almost like bare footprints. My husband checked the ceiling, pipes, bathroom, everything. There was no leak in the house. And after that, things got worse. I started hearing footsteps upstairs when all 3 of us were downstairs. Sophie would wake up crying. Twice, I heard what sounded like a woman humming from her bedroom after Sophie had fallen asleep. Then one night, I was lying in bed when I heard Sophie talking through the baby monitor. I grabbed it and listened. She said, no, my mommy is sleeping. Then silence. Then Sophie said, because you're not my mommy. I ran so fast to her room I didn't even remember getting out of the bed. Sophie was sitting upright, staring at her doorway. There was nobody there. I asked, who is she talking to? She pointed to the hallway and she said, the wet lady. She keeps asking if she can be my mommy when you're gone. That was enough for me. I told my husband I wanted out of the house. A few days later, I was packing up some of Sophie's things when I found a drawing shoved underneath her bed. It showed our house with 3 people standing outside. Me, my husband, and Sophie. There was another person drawn in the upstairs window. Long black hair, blue dress. I asked Sophie who it was. She looked at me like I was stupid, and she said, that's the wet lady. She pointed at something I hadn't noticed. Sophie had drawn another little girl standing beside the woman. I asked who the little girl was. She said, that's her daughter. She says she's still looking for her. We moved out less than a month later. Wish I could tell you this is where it ended. About a year after we moved, Sophie was looking through pictures on my phone when an old picture of the house came up. She hadn't mentioned the wet lady in months. She looked at the picture and she said, that's where my other mommy lived. I asked her what she meant. She said, the lady upstairs. Then she said something that still makes me feel sick. She doesn't live there anymore. She came with us. Sophie is 9 now, and she doesn't remember any of this. But every once in a while, usually after everyone is asleep, I find wet footprints on the hardwood floor outside of her bedroom. So I want to ask you in your audience something because I genuinely don't know what to believe anymore. Do you think whatever was in that house attached itself to my daughter and followed us? Or is there another reason a child would see the exact same woman for years and in 2 completely different houses? Thank you so much for taking the time to read my story. First of all, thank you so much for trusting me with your story and sending me that submission. My personal thoughts and opinions on this, I definitely think it sounds like this spirit did attach itself to your daughter. I think this happens to a lot of people, especially very empathetic people and intuitive people. And then when you add the aspect of somebody being a child on top of it, kids are already way more sensitive to picking up on things. If it's something that makes you feel uncomfortable, I would definitely recommend trying to clear your space, sage your space, but just know that that doesn't always work. Like in the haunted house that I grew up in that I talk about on this page, the house was healed and anointed on 3 separate occasions. It feels like nothing can kick those energies and spirits out of that space. I feel like this might genuinely be like a very innocent thing too. Maybe this spirit has attached to your daughter because it sounds like they might have had a loss. Guys watching, let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to send your own scary story to my page for a chance to be read, you can send it to the email above. As always, thank you for watching. Love you. Bye.
A reptilian asked my grandfather for help in his ranch. Now this story is coming from Terror en Palabras. The video is titled Un reptiliano le pidió ayuda a mi abuelo en su rancho. If you want to go and listen to it in Spanish, if you don't know Spanish, let me translate this for you. So this guy says that this is a story that his grandfather would share with them and never changed, and he honestly doesn't care if you believe him or not, but he does want to share what happened. Apparently this happened in the north side of San Luis Potosí. So the grandfather never really believed in the paranormal or in witches or in UFOs or anything like that. He was the type of man that said that everything had an explanation. Until the night that something happened to him. So on this particular night, the grandfather had gone out to look for some cows that never came back to the corral. And he had a machete with him, a pew-pew, and a lamp when he was out there looking for the cows. And it was because in that area, a lot of coyotes would come down the mountains. As he was walking by the river, he noticed that there was a really big blue light that almost like fell from the sky, and he lost sight of it, but it looked like it landed around the trees in that ranch. He honestly thought that maybe a transformer had exploded, or that maybe somebody had accidentally crashed their car out of like a mountain or a hill. He decided to approach where he saw that light from, and as he got closer, he said that he could hear almost like an animal breathing, but having a really hard time breathing. As he got closer and he put his lamp towards where he could hear that breathing, he saw this being laying on the ground. It looked green and it had scales all over its body. He said that the arms were really long and it only had 3 fingers, and that its eyes were yellow. The grandfather immediately picked up his pew-pew, and that is when he saw this thing pick up one hand and say, "Don't shoot, please don't shoot." He explains that even the voice coming from this being was really strange because it was almost as if a lot of different voices was coming from this one thing. The grandfather stayed very still. He stayed in shock, and he also noticed that this thing wasn't moving its mouth the way that we do, but he could still hear him clearly and what he had said. He noticed that this thing had an injury on its chest, and he saw that there was like black liquid coming out. He also remembers that it smelled like burning metal. He again hears this thing say, "Please help me." The grandfather wanted to run, but he started to hear cars coming close to where they were. He explains how this reptilian also heard when there was cars approaching, and at this point he screamed at the grandfather, "Hurry, go and hide, they're gonna get you." He pointed to this abandoned warehouse that was in the grandfather's ranch, and he tells him, "Run and hide there." It was at this point that the grandfather doesn't know why, but he did decide to help this thing. The grandfather ends up putting a tarp over this reptilian and starts putting animal feed all around him. Minutes after hiding this reptilian, the grandfather says that 3 black trucks with no license plates show up to the ranch. Men came out of those trucks, but they didn't look like police or like military. They were all dressed in black. One of the men asked the grandfather if he saw something fall from the sky, and the grandfather just said no with his head. He didn't say it out loud. The men ended up walking all along the river, looked at the corral, looked inside the grandfather's house, and obviously they didn't find anything. When they were about to leave, this man tell the grandfather, "If you do find something, don't touch it, don't help it. That is not an animal and it could hurt you." The men ended up leaving. The grandfather waited a good minute before going back to this abandoned warehouse, and when he went back, he said that this reptilian was still alive. By this point, the grandfather had came back with water because he wanted to give it to this reptilian, but he didn't end up drinking it. The grandfather noticed when the reptilian got like a piece of charcoal, and he started drawing symbols on the ground. After drawing these symbols, he pointed to the sky and told the grandfather, "Not all of us are enemies, but they want you to think that we are." The grandfather, now being very curious, asked the reptilian who were these men, and the reptilian tells him, "It's the people that work with my species." The grandfather ends up staying there in that warehouse with the reptilian until they started to see morning light come. The grandfather explains that there was also an additional light coming from the sky, and that the reptilian got up and started walking as well as he could, but before leaving towards this light, he put his hand on the grandfather's chest and tells him, "Your family will be protected." And then the light got brighter and the reptilian just completely disappeared. He explains how he followed the light to the sky and it just got lost in between clouds. The grandfather never talked about this incident for years after it happened, and the only reason why he decided to share the story with the family was because a fire had started in that area. It was really, really bad. A lot of people lost their homes, their animals, like everything that they had, except for him. The fire, it was almost like it couldn't get to his house. It couldn't get to his animals. And when everything had stopped, the fire, they were able to put everything out. They found some weird symbols surrounding the grandfather's ranch. It was that day that the grandfather knew that what the reptilian said, that his family would be protected, was true. And basically because he helped the reptilian helped him as well. Now, the guy sharing the story does say that his grandfather has passed already, which is why he wanted to share the story with everyone. But what do you guys think?
As a kid, I loved Sweden, but as an adult, I fear it. As a kid, I thought Sweden was magic. The forests felt alive. Not in a spooky way, but in a storybook way. The moss was soft as carpet, the lakes so still they looked fake, and the sky had this pale blue clarity that made you feel like the world was endless. I used to stay with my morfar, grandfather, in a little red cabin deep in the woods of Varmland. He'd wake me up early to pick lingonberries and tell me stories about trolls and skogskra, about old gods buried under rocks and lakes that could pull you under if you looked at them too long. I loved every second of it, every smell of pine, every wooden rune hanging in his home, every weird folk song he'd hum when the power went out. That was when I was 8, back when magic felt safe. I moved back to Sweden this year, at 29. My morfar passed away and left me the cabin. At first, I thought that would be peaceful, a chance to escape the noise of the city and the USA, but now I don't sleep. I don't go outside when it gets dark. And I don't look at the forest anymore because something in it is watching me back. It started on the second night. I arrived late, just past 10 p.m., driving up the old gravel road with fog crawling across the trees like fingers. I unpacked, lit the fireplace, and tried to sleep. At exactly 2:16 a.m., I heard something. A knock, not on the door, but on the window. 3 taps. Even. Deliberate. I sat up in bed, my heart was thudding. Morfar's cabin had only 2 windows, one in the kitchen, one in the bedroom. The bedroom one is on the 2nd floor. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. No more knocks. No sounds of footsteps or branches cracking, just the wind. I eventually convinced myself it was a bird, a branch, sleep deprivation, but I was wrong. Next day, I walked into town. Ostra Amtervik. Population, probably fewer than 300. I grabbed some groceries, made small talk. Everyone was kind, in that distant, silent Swedish way. But when I mentioned the cabin and said I inherited it from old Rune Dahlstrom, the cashier's smile vanished. "You're staying out there?" he asked. I nodded. He just handed me my change and said, "Don't go outside after sunset." That night, I stayed up, coffee in hand, lights on, phone charged, but nothing happened. Until 2:16 a.m. Exactly 3 knocks. This time on the kitchen window, then laughter, but not a person's laugh. Not exactly, it was too slow. Too spaced out, like someone who'd never heard a laugh before was trying to copy one. I stepped into the kitchen, my heart jackhammering. There were no lights outside. But when I got close to the window, I swear to God, I saw antlers. Big, pale antlers rising just above the sill. I backed away. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. When the sun finally rose, the ground outside the kitchen was littered with dead birds. All their heads turned to face the window. I should have left. I wanted to, but something made me stay. I started finding carved symbols in the trees around the cabin. Circles with 3 lines through them. A friend I emailed said they were ancient Nordic protection runes. Alges, meant for warding off evil. They weren't new. They'd been there for years. My morfar had carved them, surrounding the property like a barrier, but some had been scraped out. Like someone or something had clawed through them. 3 nights ago, I woke up in the woods. No memory of walking there, no shoes, just me, standing amongst the birches in complete silence. I wasn't alone. Something stood across from me, tall, thin, the antlers scraping against the trees above. Its eyes, well, no, they weren't eyes, they were holes, blacker than the forest around them, and its skin looked like bark. But it moved like it had joints. Too many joints. It whispered my name, not in Swedish, in my own voice. I ran. I don't remember getting back to the cabin, but I locked every door. I turned on every light, and the next morning I carved my own rune into the front door. This morning, I got a letter. No stamp, no return address, just sitting on the porch. Inside was a note, and it was in Swedish, but it translates to, Papa, your grandson doesn't like me.
Oh.
I used to think Sweden was magic. Now I know it is, but not in the way I thought. There are old things here, things that live in the silence, in the fog, in the still lakes and the crooked trees, things that remember names, things that wear the voices of loved ones, things that knock at 2:16 a.m. and they don't like when you leave or when you return. I'm leaving tomorrow, or at least I'll try. If you're reading this, don't go to Sweden. And if you have to, be careful, especially at 2:16.
Imagine getting a random text from a tarot card reader offering you her services. What's up, cousins? So you already know I am back with another story time. Just like any time, let's not waste no time and let's get into it. Okay, so for this story, we're going to call her Shauna. So Shauna said one day she was in her room minding her own business. Then she ended up getting an iMessage text out the blue and did not recognize the email that it came from. So when the text came through, it said, "Hi, the universe wanted me to tell you something and help you out." So Shauna said, "Okay." So Shauna knew it was a woman behind the message because the email had Lady in it. Thinking about it, we just gonna call her Lady. So Lady proceeds to text Shauna and asks her, "Do you want a pregnancy reading or do you want a love reading?" So Shauna says she wants a love reading because her and her ex-boyfriend just recently broke up. So Lady said, "Okay, well, how much is your budget?" Which confused Shauna because she's like, "What do you mean budget?" But Shauna proceeded to say she only had $30 to spare. So Lady said, "Okay, well, send me the $30 and I'll go ahead and do your love reading." So Shauna sent the money. Lady then responds and says, "Send me your first, your last name, and a picture of yourself." It confused Shauna, but she still did it. So 2 hours go by and the lady never responded after Shauna sent her her full name and a picture of herself. So she ended up texting the lady like, "Hey, what's going on?" The lady responded back and said, "Babe, I'm working." So Shauna was like, "Well, show me some proof." So lady ended up sending her a photo with Shauna picture around some candles. So Shauna's like, "Well, what is all of this? Because I never asked for you to do this. All I asked for was a love reading." Shauna was like, "I didn't want no spell and all that." So lady was like, "Oh no, this is how it's going to work with your picture." Shauna said in that moment, she did not feel safe anymore. She didn't know what was going on, but she knew something was going on. And also, lady proceeded to tell her that she had following her. The lady then said that she had all these bad things happening to her and she needed more money to give Shauna a cleanse. So with getting all this information, Shauna is trying to wrap her mind around, what does this have to do with the love reading? Shauna still had this weird feeling that something was going on here, so she just stopped texting lady. Despite Shauna not texting lady, lady proceeds to text Shauna over and over and over for the next few days. A couple weeks go by, Shauna ended up finding out that she's pregnant by her ex-boyfriend. So now she ended up contacting her ex-boyfriend, letting him know like, "Hey, we got a baby on the way." The ex-boyfriend told her, "Get rid of it." She was like, "No, like, let's get back together for the baby." So that's what they did. They got back together for the baby. However, it did not last long. Shauna says she felt like he hated her for deciding to keep the baby. So boom, fast forward, a couple days go by, lady ended up texting Shauna again, but this time contacting Shauna from a different number. Now Shauna is getting all these messages from lady about how she was going to curse her, how she was going to unalive her if she did not send her $200 instead of the $55 that she was originally asking for. At this point, Shauna says she's terrified. She says she even offered to send the woman $400 if she just leave her alone. So lady said, "Okay, but if you don't, I'm going to put an unaliving spell on you." Lady proceeded to text Shauna every single day, asking if she had the money. Shauna did end up thinking to herself, why would I send you $400 when you didn't even complete what I originally needed completed in the first place? So Shauna was like, "Nah, I ain't sending you nothing." So lady was like, "Well, I can finish it for you." Shauna was like, "Nah, I'm good, because why would you even do a spell when I didn't even ask for a spell? I asked for a love reading and you did something that I didn't even ask for." Shauna said she don't know what she got herself into. So Shauna and lady is going back and forth for the messages, back and forth, and lady ends up telling Shauna, "If you don't have the $400, I'm going to unalive you." Shauna said she don't know what she was thinking by even responding to the message in the first place, but she knows moving forward this is something that she would never do again. Let's take a moment of silence for these text messages. Shauna says she still thinks about it to this day. That's all for this story time. Make sure you guys like, comment, share, and repost. If you guys have a spooky, scary story, make sure you either DM it to me or send it to the email that's in my bio. And to the next story, enjoy this one.
It would seem that this cryptid came back for him. The person telling this story says this is the scariest encounter they've ever had, and they believe that this was a cryptid of the crawler variety. All right, I don't have a name here, so we're going to call him Austin for the story. Austin was living with his aunt, who lived in a more rural area in the city, and he biked to and from work. Austin said that this route went through a natural wooded area. Of course, it was not very populated, and it also did not have a lot of streetlights along the way. Cars barely drove down, and it was a pretty isolated route. It basically cut through a large forest area. So one night, Austin was biking home from work and he got to the wooded section of his route. So before going down the sloped area, he paused to take his phone out and his earbuds so that he could choose the music and listen to it on the rest of the way home. But just as he went to take his phone out of his pocket, he heard the sound of a branch cracking nearby. So Austin looks up. He said standing just a few feet away was this tall, bony, pale creature. He said it was standing off to the side of a trail, but still on the sidewalk. It had large black eyes, no nose, and a thin slit for a mouth. Its hands were extremely long and had long clawed fingers. He said it was standing in kind of a squatted, almost semi-crawling posture. Austin said that before he could even react to what he was seeing, this thing let out a huge, loud screech. And then, at an insane speed, it just leapt into the brush and denser areas beyond the trail. Austin said that hearing that screech sent him into sheer panic fight or flight mode, and he pedaled as fast as he could right through that forested area. He also said that the entire time he pedaled, he could hear cracking and breaking of branches, almost like this thing was keeping pace with him, following him. He said it was like it was giving him chase, but not wanting to be seen again, if that makes sense. So Austin gets through the forested area, which then opened up into a residential kind of area. There were now streetlights and homes off in the distance. And he wound up stopping underneath the streetlight and sort of looked back to the forest line. And when he looked over, he saw that figure squatted down at the edge of the forest, just watching him intensely. Austin says that after he caught his breath, he wound up speeding back home to his aunt's house. He threw his bike in the garage, closed it, and rushed inside and locked every door and window he could think of and ran up to his bedroom, locked the door, and refused to sleep that night. So here's the craziest part of all. He said that that was not the first time he saw this creature. Just a few weeks later, when he looked out into his aunt's backyard, he saw this thing crouching down, staring up at his freaking window. And then that was the last time he said he hasn't seen it since. His words were, "I do 100% believe that it was a subterranean cryptid or creature due to its appearance." Now, he points out something really interesting. He says that the area that this happens in has a few trails that wind up going underground. He also said that it just so happened to be that the city was doing some construction on some of those tunnels in that area of the trail. Austin thinks that the construction on some of those tunnels or areas of the trail is kind of what caused this thing to come out of hiding. Austin says it feels like he just happened to be at the right place, well, at the wrong time. So now tell me, what are your thoughts? What cryptid do we think that this is? Drop it down in the comments. And if you have your own cryptid story, you gotta share it. If you're interested in Creepy Storytime merch, check out the LINK in my bio. And if you're new here, you gotta follow for more Creepy Storytime.
Marine wrote into Spooky Scary Storytime, and he said that he has seen plenty of strange things, especially in the Mojave Desert, that have left him unsettled. But all of the things that he's seen, he could find an explanation for. And nothing prepared him for what he saw on an Indiana back road. His name is Jay Graff, and Jay says that he has heard strange noises in the middle of the desert. He's seen phantom runners even that vanish in a split second, and has even had what he believes could have been a possible UAP encounter in the sky. Though all of these experiences were directly observed, he said he could probably find logical explanations for any of those things if he tried hard enough. The story he's sharing now is the one occurrence that he is unable to convince himself is a trick of his own mind. He said this happened much more recently in his hometown of northern Indiana, and he said it happened in daylight in plain sight. It occurred in October just after 5 p.m. He was on his way home to his homestead from the grocery store, and he was taking the scenic route. He was trying to have a little alone time, some peace before the chaotic bedtime routine of putting the kids to bed. Said he was less than a 3-minute drive from his front door, and with it being about 5 p.m. in October, the horizon was just beginning to swallow the sun for the night, and the sky was still blue with no stars, so he had perfect visibility in front of him. Which is why he says he knows he didn't imagine or misperceived what he saw next. He came over a little hill in the road, from which the next turn he had to make was visible at about 50 yards away, and as he came over the final rise in the road, he saw what seemed to be 2 dogs fighting. Said they were fighting at most 40 yards from his truck, and they looked like they were locked into absolutely vicious combat with each other. He is sure that he saw 2 faces and 2 jaws snapping at each other and 8 limbs flying around in the air as they fought. As he came up to this dogfight, he says he noticed that there was something very wrong about these dogs. At first glance, they looked like greyhounds, and he thought maybe they were just built a little bit wrong with their bodies being a little bit too thick and muscular in the back. They just weren't quite shaped right. Fur was close to the right color, but both dogs seemed to be ashen, and he noticed their eyes, which were completely black, and he says they actually looked dead to him. They had absolutely no whites, just deep pits of black. As he struggles to explain it exactly how he knew something was wrong, he says his grandmother kept a greyhound that he loved very much as a child, and he has his own livestock dogs. He knows that animal eyes often look large and dark and pupilless from a distance. He also knows what dogs are supposed to look like even when they're fighting, and these 2 were something else. He does not believe that these were fully dogs. All of this observation happened in a matter of a few seconds as he's coming up to this dogfight, and he said he started to get the sense that something was, to put it mildly, not normal. As he was approaching within about 15 yards of this dogfight, he said he started to slow down and he rolled down his window, and as he did, one of them stopped fighting and dropped to the ground, and the other ran off into the woods. Bolted and disappeared into the woodline on the east side of the road. And as he came up to the dog that had fallen, he sort of slowed down even more, and he kind of craned his neck out the window to see if this thing was even alive. He said he will never forget the stone that settled into the pit of his stomach as he passed it, because passing within 2 feet of this thing was nothing but a rotting rib cage. He said there was no blood, no debris, no signs that anything had happened, nothing but a dog-sized rib cage. He said it looked like it had been there a while, clearly in an advanced state of decay, and it was the same color of ashen gray that both creatures had been when they were fighting. He says he drove home feeling like lead, and when he got home, his wife could tell that something was wrong, and so he told her what he saw, and she said, well, if it's bothering you so much, why don't you just go back and get a closer look? So he says about 15 minutes later, against his better judgment, he did, and he drove the 0.8 miles back to the spot where he had witnessed the fight. Now, the rib cage was gone. There was no hair, no bones, no blood. Nothing to indicate that anything had ever been there to begin with. He says, I have absolutely no idea and no theory about what I witnessed. All I know is that this occurred exactly as I've described it. He said, I know for sure that I saw 2 of them, that they were fighting, and that they looked like vicious imitations of a greyhound with too much muscle. He says, I know that I witnessed one of them collapse into a rotting half carcass in a split second, and while I would love to believe that I misperceived something about this, my eyes are too good to be tricked that easily. He used a pseudonym, so I don't think he'll be responding to any comments, but if you have any thoughts for him or you have any theories about what he saw, let him know. He will be seeing the comments, and if you have an unsettling story of your own, please send it in to Spooky Scary Storytime. We would love to hear it.
Here are more spooky stories that I found in my TikTok comments, and this is going to be another long one, so strap in. Okay, let's go. One time I woke up around 2 to 3 a.m. and went to go get water. The water dispenser was in the dining room, and from the dining room you could see the kitchen. Once I got my water, I just felt the urge to turn to my right, and so I did. Standing in the kitchen was a pale white figure with its mouth open. I was frozen with an overwhelming amount of fear. I wanted to move, but I couldn't. I was too scared. Its arm moved slightly, and I booked it back to my room and started scream crying. My mom ran into my room and asked what happened. I was too scared to say what happened. I stayed up with my mom, and I was about 9 around that time, so I was really traumatized. One time I had a dream about a man crawling all over our ceiling and leaving red handprints and feet prints. A little over a year later, I look at my ceiling in the garage, and there is red handprints and feet prints with long feet and long nail prints. It looked not human, and we only ever use it for storage. I didn't tell anyone about the dream as I thought it was silly. I feel like that physical evidence is both validating and terrifying. One day I went to brush my teeth. For no reason, just wanted to. And before I switched the light on, I saw this figure, and it had a girlish appearance, but it wasn't human.
I switched the light on and it was gone. The events only got worse. I would wake up with scratches on me and things would fall off my desk. And one time I was sleeping and somehow I ended up in the hallway screaming my head off. Then I had a series of nightmares. One, that figure was walking to me. She wasn't a normal thing, and I think I said something like, "Leave me alone." After that, nothing happened, but the figure still visits me and giggles in my bathroom. When I was in 6th grade, I was home alone for the first time, but my brother and dad didn't tell me they were leaving. They just left the door to the basement open because they were working on something down there. The basement door covers the hallway when it's open. I heard footsteps on the other side of the door. It was like when your feet stick to the wooden floors and you're trying to tiptoe to be quiet. Me, thinking it was my brother trying to jump scare me, I run up to the door and close it to scare him first. No one there. I called my dad and him, and my brother went to buy tools for the basement, but those footsteps were loud and clear. I hid in a room with a crucifix and a knife and the house phone until they came back. I used to start crying when I had to go to bed because the lady in the white coat isn't nice. I used to wake up with bruises that I couldn't explain quite often. After we moved houses when I was 7, it stopped. The house we lived in back then is 100 plus years old. A few years ago, I was getting my lunch ready for work around 5:30 a.m. I went down into our unfinished basement to grab something out of the freezer, and I heard a faint bang, like something dropping, coming from the far end of the basement. I immediately shut the freezer and rushed up the stairs when the lights turned off and it sounded like footsteps coming up the stairs right behind me. I slammed the basement door and ran out to my car and drove to work in complete silence. It hasn't happened since, but I don't go down there anymore unless my dad is with me. When I was about 14, I woke up to the feeling of someone sitting on the edge of my bed. I looked up and it was an old lady. She kissed me on the forehead. I didn't know who it was and thought maybe it was a relative I'd never met. My family doesn't know who it was either, and no one was visiting the house. After 9th grade, my mom and her girlfriend decided they wanted a nicer apartment, so we moved. On move-in day, my room was one of the first ones to get hauled over, so while everyone was finishing up at the old apartment, I stayed behind in the new one and unpacked my room. There was about a half-inch gap between the door and door frame, so I could see shadows of people walking by my bedroom. I was happy as can be watching Twilight on DVD and moving my clothes from box to drawer. After about 20 minutes, I realized that from the corner of my eye to my right, I was seeing a shadow go back and forth in front of my bedroom door. At first I thought, it's probably my mom. Then I went completely still when it hit me that no one was here but me. The other room was empty too. In this same apartment for months, my doorknob would rattle at night. I would always feel watched and saw a lot of shadow people. I lived there for 4 months before my mom decided to move again because we kept having issues with the landlord. I wonder if that was maybe a blessing in disguise. I once rented a jet ski in a city up north of my country and I left my sunglasses on. I ended up falling from the jet ski and losing them deep in the ocean. After I got back to my hometown and after months went by, I borrowed completely different sunglasses that belonged to my father. When I got back home at night, I put them downstairs in the living room. I remember it clearly. In the morning, my dad asked me for his glasses back, so I went downstairs to get them, and in the exact place I found the glasses, I found the sunglasses I had lost at sea and didn't find his sunglasses. To this day, no one believes me, and he still thinks that I lost his glasses. I still lose my mind sometimes thinking about this unexplainable event. The way that would also frustrate me to no end. As always, I love these stories. Okay, bye!
A follower from Louisiana sent me this, and after his family shot at a creature that was stalking their house, their neighbors showed up the next morning with a wound in the exact same spot. Now, this story was sent to me by a viewer named Kareem, and he told me that it happened to his cousin Nadia back in the fall of 2015. And this happened in Shreveport, Louisiana. Now, I can't verify any of this as always, so take it as entertainment and you decide for yourself. But if what his family experienced is true, then they may have discovered exactly what had been living next door to them all along. So according to Kareem, this happened to his cousin Nadia and her family in Shreveport, Louisiana. And the neighborhood that they lived in was a very close-knit, tight group of people. And many of the families that were originally from Haiti or the Dominican Republic had migrated there many years ago, so it was a solid group. And stories about spirits, curses, and brujas weren't treated as fairy tales. They were treated as like warnings, and real warnings. And there was this one woman in particular who made everyone uneasy in the neighborhood. She lived only a few houses away, and nobody could ever prove that she'd done anything wrong, but strange things always seemed to happen whenever she was around, or shortly after she would leave. Pets would disappear. People claimed that they woke up exhausted after vivid nightmares of her. Children refused to walk past her yard after sunset. And whenever someone brought up the rumors that she practiced witchcraft, she'd never confirm them, but she also never denied them either. And the adults in Nadia's family had one rule that was never to be broken, and that was never accept food from her at all, no matter what. It didn't matter if it was fruit, vegetables, anything from her garden. No candy, nothing. If she ever offered you something, you would politely refuse and just keep walking. Nobody ever explained why, but only that there was something off with her. Then in the fall of 2015, everything changed. Just after midnight one evening, the family heard something outside. And at first they assumed it was maybe a wild hog or some type of wild animal. Louisiana has plenty of them, but this was different. Nadia looked through the living room curtains and she froze. Standing near the edge of the property was what she described as an enormous wild boar, except it wasn't built like one. Its shoulders were strangely broad, its front legs looked almost like arms, its posture wasn't normal. It wasn't like it was completely on all fours, and the way that it like would stare back at them felt almost like this thing was part human. It didn't charge at the house. It simply just walked slow circles around the property, watching like it was waiting for them, and eventually it disappeared into the darkness. Now, the family barely slept that night, and the next morning they mentioned it to the neighbor, that everyone believed was a bruja, and she smiled and almost like she already knew what they were talking about. And then she just laughed and was like, "Oh, that's just something that protects the area." That was it, nothing more. And they had asked her, what she meant by that. Well, does it symbolize something? But she wouldn't answer. She only smiled again, and she would change the subject. Now, the following night, the creature ended up coming back, and this time it got closer. The scratching along the walls continued for hours, heavy footsteps echoed around the windows, and at one point, something slammed against the side of the house hard enough to shake framed pictures off of the walls, and they fell down and broke. Still, no one dared to go outside. And by the third night, Nadia's father had reached his limit and he was completely over the whole thing. So he loaded up the shotgun, turned on the porch light, and he just waited. And sometime a little after midnight, he saw it. It came back, and it was standing near the fence, just watching the house. And he yelled for it to leave, and it didn't move. Instead, it just slowly stepped closer. And he raised up the shotgun and he fired. The blast hit what looked like the creature's right arm, and the creature let out a scream unlike anything that he'd ever heard before, and it disappeared into the darkness almost instantly. Now, the family searched the yard the next morning. There was no body, there was no red stuff, no trail of it. There was nothing. And they started convincing themselves that maybe it had all been their imagination, maybe it was an actual animal, or, but until later on that morning, the kids were walking to the neighborhood prayer group when they passed the neighbor's house, and she was outside working in her garden, and she stopped what she was doing, looked directly at them, and didn't smile like she normally did. Instead, she stared at them with this hatred that none of them had ever seen before. Such hatred that they could feel it. And then Nadia noticed something, and the woman's right arm was wrapped in a thick white bandage, exactly where her father swore that he had shot the creature only hours earlier. Now, nobody said a word, they just kept walking. But according to Kareem, his family never spoke to that woman ever again. And not long afterward, she ended up moving away, and no one really knows what happened to her. So I want to know, was it all just one terrifying coincidence, or did Nadia's father actually hit the thing that been circling their home, only to discover it had been living next door to them the entire time? I'll let you decide, and let me know what you guys think in the comments.
There's a particular set of rules that you must remember if you are to camp alone. Now, the first rule of camping alone is never set up your tent at night. because this is when you are the most vulnerable. And you cannot keep focus on what's behind you, what's around you, because you're focused on putting up the tent. The second rule is always have a fire going. No matter what time of day it is, always keep that fire going and keep it nice and bright and tall. The third rule that you must remember if you're camping alone is when you go in your tent at night, make sure it is completely sealed up. No holes, make sure everything is zipped and closed, because it's believed that stuff can even come in through the tiniest of cracks. Now, the fourth rule, when you are camping alone, you should never make noise at night. You should never whistle. You should never sing. You should try and keep it quiet as possible. Now, the fifth rule, which is the most important, is always have some sort of entertainment. Keep yourself occupied. Have some music. Have an audio book, but never let yourself start to wander and let your mind go, because that's when you are the most vulnerable. Now, there was this man named Jonathan. Jonathan decided he was going to go camping alone up in the Rocky Mountains. So he heads up to the spot, and he sets up his tent and gets his campsite ready. And he said he just remembered that, there were all these sounds of wildlife and the wind blowing, and it was just very peaceful and sort of like musical. And he said, he had his dog with him, and they sat around the fire for a bit, and it started to get late, so he decided to go into his tent. So as he goes in his tent, his dog lays over to the side of him, and soon he begins to doze off. Well, at some point in time in the night, he awakes to something shaking his tent. And he said he could hear this voice saying, "Please come out of the tent. Like, I need help. Help me, please. Get out of the tent. Help me." And so he's like, what's going on? Like, what's going on? So he goes to the zipper, he unzips the tent, and he goes outside. But when he gets out of the tent, there's nobody around. It's just completely quiet. And it was eerily quiet because he couldn't hear the wind anymore. He couldn't hear the wildlife. And he said that the other strange thing was when he went to bed, there was this bright full moon overhead. But as he looked up in the sky, the moon was gone. There wasn't any clouds. It was a completely clear night. But the moon somehow had disappeared. So this kind of freaked him out a little bit. He goes back inside his tent and he zips up the zipper. Well, he lays down, and he said, his dog would come to the side of him or would lay by his feet, and that always made him feel a little better. So he said, he started to kind of doze off again. He said that's when he kept feeling like the dog, like rubbing his leg. And he's like, "What are you doing, boy? Like, I'm trying to sleep." And he said that's when he looks down at his feet, and there's nothing there. And when he looks over, his dog is right over here towards his head. So he is like, what's going on? Like, was there an animal or something? He unzips the tent, he goes outside, said, there was nothing out there. As he got ready to go back in his tent, he said he started to see these shadows. He said he could see figures that looked like they were tall, skinny, kind of lanky. They almost looked like they were crawling around amongst the trees. They were all around him. So he hurried up, got back inside his tent, and he zips it up. And he just said, he's just sitting there with his dog. And the whole time he thought it was strange because the dog didn't alert to any of this. It didn't bark. It was just quiet. It was just laying there. And he said that's when all of a sudden he felt this tent start to move. Something grabbed the tent and was dragging him. And he was so afraid that he passes out. And when he awakes, he said the tent was completely still, felt like everything was normal again. He said he thought it must have been a dream until he unzips the tent and he realizes he is a good distance away from his campsite. So he grabs his dog and they run out of there back to his vehicle, and they left that night, and they left the tent and everything behind. So it's important to remember, when you camp alone, always know the rules. Movie theaters don't exist. Now, hear me out. When is the last time you've seen a new movie theater being built? I mean, think about it, right? In every town, there are the same exact theaters that have been there for years and years. And it's like you never see these things being constructed. So are they even real? And when you think about a theater, right? On the outside, it just doesn't make sense because it's just this small square building. But when you go inside, there's just endless amounts of spaces. Okay, there's sometimes 20, 25 theaters in a megaplex. But from the outside, how do they fit all of these theaters in that building, right? And with all the exits and, in all the different directions that these theaters face, like the layout just doesn't make sense to me. So the question is, how in the world do these things function? And also, when you think about it, it's kind of creepy because if just one person goes and sees a movie, right, they don't cancel that show, right? You still get to see that movie. And sometimes the theater's set completely empty while there is a movie playing. So why are they showing movies when no one's even watching them? What is the point of that? Now, if you talk to anyone who's worked at a movie theater, they'll tell you the same thing. There are a lot of creepy things that happened. There was this man named Andre. Andre said that one night he was bored and he wanted to go see a movie. So he goes to his local theater and goes inside and he goes up to this kiosk. He said as he looked through the kiosk, he found this movie called Mystico. He said, that's strange. I've never heard of it. I haven't seen any trailers for it. Why not? Let's give it a shot. So he gets a ticket. And then he goes to the concessions and he starts talking to them. Hey, have you guys seen that movie Mystico? And none of them seem to know what he's talking about. We've not heard of that movie. We didn't even know we were playing that movie. And he's like, yeah, I haven't heard of it either. So then Andre follows his ticket and it leads him down a series of hallways all the way to this theater on the end. Now, he goes inside this theater and he said the first thing he noticed, which was really odd because he'd been to this theater many times, is all of the seating looked very old. It wasn't stadium seating. It wasn't these recliners. It was these wooden chairs. And he said, everything about this theater looked like it was from like the 1930s, 1940s. Nothing had been updated, unlike the rest of this theater. So he just went and he sat down in the middle row. We said the theater was already dark, and the projector was just playing a series of just weird, like trailers for movies he had never even heard of. And he said finally the movie came on, and he said this movie just really didn't make no sense. It was just people walking around in just an enclosed room. And he watched this for about 20 minutes when finally he said, you know what, I'm out. Like, I don't like this. He said, but that's when he realized, like, he didn't pay attention to anybody that had came in the theater or anybody that was around him. And he said, as he started to focus his eyes onto the seats all around him, he said there were all of these people. He said the theater was packed. But these people weren't sitting in their chair. He said some of them were standing. Some of them were walking back and forth through the aisles. He said, but something was off about them. They did not look human. And he said they almost seemed to be very robotic, doing the same thing over and over again. So he slowly got up and he walked around each one of these people that were just standing. He said as he started to walk down the stairs to the exit, he said he looked back and the theater was completely empty. Everyone was gone. So he hurried to the exit and he got out of there. So the next day he goes back to the theater and he's like, hey, what's up with this movie Mystico? And he said, the guy behind the counter's like, I don't know what you're talking about. We don't play a movie called Mystico. He said, no, I watched it last night. I was in theater, whatever. And it was playing. They said, we don't have a theater, 26, 27. He said, no, I was in there last night. I have my ticket stub. And he went to go reach for the ticket stub. He didn't have it. He couldn't find it. It wasn't in his wallet anymore. But he told him, I could show you. Let me show you. So he said the employee went with him into the theater and he showed him where, he had gone in, except there wasn't a theater there. It was just an exit. And they told him, sir, are you all right? Like, is everything okay? Maybe we should go home. And so he said he left, but he never could figure out what that movie was, how he seen it, and how he could have watched this movie that just didn't exist.
This photo was taken in a children's hospital. It was taken in a part of the hospital that treats infants. There was absolutely nobody around when it was taken. This photo was taken by my cousin in my house. My parents and I had gone to the mall to buy a few things, and my parents asked her if she could come to my house to take care of and feed our dogs. While we were shopping, I got a message from my cousin saying that she had fed my dog and sending me updates. She started sending me random photos of my dog, and then she sent this one. At first, neither she nor I noticed these two lights behind the door. It was only until a few weeks later, while I was looking through my chat with my cousin, that I finally noticed them. My grandparents live in a very old house, and they have lots of stories of a girl ghost living in this house. Even before they lived there, when the house was abandoned, the neighbors would report seeing the little girl walking around. My grandparents have security cameras all over their house. On a random night, the security camera picked up some motion. Both my grandparents and I firmly believe that we captured the little girl.
Want to get creeped out? I have a story of someone who tried the Midnight Man or the Midnight Game. It was this group of friends, 3 people. They played it, and one of their friends started acting really strangely while they were playing. Started humming, stopping instead of like you're supposed to move around the whole time. The Midnight Man ritual is essentially like inviting the Midnight Man, this terrifying entity, into your home. Anyways, their friend started acting really, really strange, and the story is really scary, and you might want to hear it. So this is a story of 3 friends who tried the Midnight Man. This was Jesse, Kai, and Elise. Okay, they were all best friends, and they thought it would be fun, but they didn't think anything would happen. Yeah, fair. I want to preface by saying that when they were setting up the ritual, which, you know, putting their name on the paper, cutting or poking their finger for the blood, Elise, her hand slipped and she cut her finger really bad. So there was a lot of blood on her paper. They start moving around the house with their candles and chatting as they go. And after about 15 minutes, Elise stops talking with Jesse and Kai, and weird things start happening. It really doesn't take much time at all for weird things to start happening. Specifically with Elise, she just starts acting really weird off the jump. She starts humming.
She's the one who cut her finger bad, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, she fucked up.
And Jesse and Kai are kind of like looking at each other, and they're like, this is weird, but they just keep moving. They keep on chatting, kind of ignoring Elise until one time they come around towards her and they see her standing in a corner of the living room, not moving.
Bye.
And they're like, Elise, what are you doing? Like, you have to keep moving. And she's like, yeah, sorry. And then she starts moving again.
She's gonna like morph into the fucking Midnight Man or something creepy.
So they're walking around, and Jessie said that both her and Kai talked about this later, that they were both feeling at the time like this bad gut feeling. And like Elise was really off, but they weren't sure if she was just trying to like freak them out.
Okay.
Or if she was really acting weird.
Right.
But she did something shortly after that made them feel like this was more than her just trying to scare them, because it was so out of character for her.
Do you believe in water spirits? A follower that wants to remain anonymous sent me this spooky story, and honestly, I feel like it's perfect for Shark Week. For the sake of this story, we're going to call him Kyle, and he said that he's had several of non-threatening encounters with the ocean, but this specific one was the worst that the ocean has thrown at him, is what he said. So he says that he was surfing at Barra. I don't know what that means. It's spelled B-A-R-R-A. So he says that he's surfing and he is literally paddling with his hands, and out of nowhere, he feels like someone jumped on his back, threw him off of his board, and he is underwater, right? So he's underwater, he opens his eyes and he's like looking around trying to come back up, and as he's doing so, he sees this huge 12-foot shark, at least 12-foot shark, underneath him. Freaks out, tries to get back on his board. He's looking around and he's confused because there's absolutely nobody there. The nearest person to him is about 30 meters away. He said that this happened in the 70s. He's never experienced anything like this before or ever since. He's an avid surfer still to this day, and he cannot explain what jumped on his back. It didn't feel like anything fishy or anything like that. It felt like an actual person jumping on his back, knocking him off of his board. So his question is, do you guys believe in water spirits? A lot of people say that mermaids are real. Many say that sirens are real. What about water spirits? And honestly, I've never come across anything like this. I love the ocean. I love the beach. I could literally sit there for hours, but I don't surf. I don't go deep into the ocean like that. So I've never experienced anything like this. But if you have, please let me know, because now I'm intrigued and I want to do a deep dive on water spirits, because this is crazy. Who jumped on his back?
what jumped on his back and knocked him off of his surfboard. Like I mentioned, Kyle wants to remain anonymous, but he will be reading the comments and let me know what you guys think. I want to hear your perspective, and if you guys have any sort of spooky story that involves the ocean, shark encounters, I'm dying to know. I am an avid lover of Shark Week. I love Shark Week, and I just thought this one was super fun for Shark Week. But anyways, if you have a spooky story that you'd like for me to read, please make sure that you send it via DM or email, because I love to read it, and I will see you guys in the next spooky story. Bye!
A German ghost hunting team were asked to investigate the house of one of the members' childhood friends. His mom lived in the house, and for some reason, she placed over 30 mirrors almost everywhere. After the mother moved out, her son decided to sell the house. Real estate agents then took pictures, and one of them showed this very strange creature in the mirror. We went on a cruise and we set up a camera to watch our cats while we were away. We were just watching a few recordings and we saw this happen to our pillow. We do have a third cat, but we don't think this was her. We visited Blundell's cottage at night and were unable to go in as they only do tours throughout the day. Feeling disappointed, we pressed our phones up to the windows and took photos on night mode. We didn't see this until we got home and never saw a figure while we were there. I've tried debunking this photo, but there are no shadows reflecting, and this truly looks like a woman with a long dress on. I took this photo in 2017. I've been wondering what's beside me ever since.
I was hired to clean a house after somebody passed away, but somebody was already living there. A few years ago, I worked with a company, and our job was to clean out houses after somebody had passed away before the house was put on the market again. Most of the time, the family had already come and grabbed what they wanted to, and then the rest was up to us just to make it look nice before it got put back on the market. So one morning, my coworker and I, we were assigned to a house. It was an elderly lady's home, and she passed away a couple months earlier before we got to cleaning it. Her son met us outside when we pulled up, and he handed us a key, and he said that he had been checking on the house every couple of days since she passed away, just to make sure everything was good. And then he said, best of luck, thank you so much. And then he left, and we went inside the house using the key to clean it. The house, when you entered, looked pretty much as you would expect. There was lots of dust everywhere. They still had some family pictures hanging on the walls. I guess nobody wanted them. Furniture was still where it was placed, right? My coworker started downstairs and I started upstairs. About 20 minutes into my cleaning session, I opened up one of the spare bedrooms, and I noticed that everything was covered in dust except for the bed. The bed was perfectly straightened out and made. There was no dust on top. It didn't look, I don't know, it looked out of place. And then I also noticed that there was a half glass full of water sitting on the nightstand. I remember the son mentioned that he's been checking on the house every few days, so I just kind of told myself, okay, maybe he left this, right? And I didn't think too much of it, and then I kept on cleaning. About an hour later, I opened up one of the closets, and I called my coworker to come back up upstairs to look at it with me, because inside was several unwrapped food wrappers. There was a backpack, there was a flashlight, and there was a grocery receipt, and it was dated 3 days prior to when we were there cleaning. My coworker and I, we just kind of looked at each other, and neither of us wanted to state the obvious of somebody's obviously been living in this house. Maybe it was the son, I don't know. So we both went outside and we called the son and we let him know what we found, and we asked him if he had been staying there or if he left these things, and he said, no, I have not, that was not me. So he drove back to the house. As we kept having a conversation of what could be happening in the home, he let us know that he changed all of the locks after his mom passed away, so nobody should be able to have a key or access inside of this house. We wound up calling the police. The police showed up. They went and searched the house. They searched the attic, the basement, all the bedrooms, bathrooms, hallway, closets, anything that would have been holding somebody there, right? However, when we went back into the house, we went back into the spare bedroom, and we noticed that the bed was now pulled down, as it was not like that before. The glass of water was gone, and the bedroom window was open. The officer looked over at the window, and he noticed that there were fresh footprints in the flower bed below, like somebody literally just left from inside of the house and escaped. At that same time, the son came into the spare bedroom, and he had a coffee mug, and he was like, did either of you guys like bring this mug, or did either of you wash this? And I was like, no, we hadn't gotten to the kitchen yet. And he said, my mom never owned this mug, and it did have like a fresh ring of coffee in it. To sum it up, the police never found out who was staying there, but what gives me the chills is thinking about if we never opened up that closet, would whoever was living there or staying there just have watched us the whole time?
Have you ever noticed how every Native American reservation is next to a national park, a national forest, or a national grassland? And at the same time, the Native Americans have these legends of these supernatural entities or creatures that live in these areas. So why is that? Now, there are some people who speculate that these national parks, these national forests, are some type of preserve, that they are keeping something hidden there, and that these supernatural creatures or entities are sort of protected in this area, and they're kept in that area to keep them away from the general population. Now, there are thousands of stories of people having encounters with these supernatural entities. There was a story out of California in the Six Rivers National Forest. There was this group of 4 men. They went on a camping trip. They happened to find this dispersed campsite up in the mountains. And one of the gentlemen, he happened to be driving this Chevy Astro van. So they get to this campsite and they pull in for the night. Well, the first thing this guy notices is he feels like he's being watched. Not just being watched, he feels like he is a prey being watched by a predator. And so all night he kept just looking over his shoulder, thinking that something was going to come out of the woods. Well, eventually his nerves calmed down. They have this campfire, they sing some songs, and they tell some stories. So they finally go in for the night, and everybody else sleeps in the tent except for this guy who sleeps in the van. So he eventually falls asleep, and he starts to have this dream. He said in this dream, it felt like it was real. He'd seen himself getting out of the van and walking into the woods. He says as he's walking past all these trees, he started to realize something was following him. Now, at the corner of his eye, he could see these shadows kind of appearing behind the trees. So he moved a little faster, but he felt whatever this was, it was keeping pace. It was tracking him. So he started to run. He said finally he stops. He comes to this area where there are several trees very closely grouped together. He said as he stopped, it got very, very quiet. And that's when he noticed some movement up by the trees. And he sees this spinely fingered hand slowly wrap its arm around this tree. And he sees this face peeking from behind the tree. And it was this pale figure with these solid black eyes and these sharp, jagged teeth. And it was just staring at him. He said it then winked, and it began to wave its finger, telling him to come close. And right at that moment, he awoke. He was standing in the middle of the woods. His friends were right next to him, yelling at him. asking him if he was all right. And he had no idea how he had gotten into the woods, how he left the van. So he talks to his friends, and they're like, what's going on? Are you all right? He said, I don't know. I just woke up here in the woods. He said, yeah, we heard you screaming like you were in trouble, like something was wrong. So we came running, and we found you out here sleepwalking. So he was a little spooked after that. That night he didn't sleep. And the next morning, all he could think about was, how did I end up in the woods? So the second night, they all go to bed. And once again, he sleeps in the van. So he said when he fell asleep, he began to have a dream. And he said in the dream, he was back in the woods. And he said once again, it felt like something was following him. And he said the faster he ran, the faster it moved. He said that's when he was running as fast as he could. When all of a sudden he said he felt something grab his arm. And he felt something slice the side of his arm. And he trips and he falls to the ground. And as he rolls over, he begins to see this pale white creature hovering over him, slowly making its way on top of him. It got to the point where its face was in his face. He said this thing was snarling. Drops of mucus was pouring down its face onto his face. And he said that's when this thing stuck its tongue out and it began to move it around his face slowly. And he started to scream. Well, then he wakes up. He realizes he's in his van and his friends are banging on the windows, banging on the doors. Are you okay? Let us in. Are you okay? So he opens his door and his friend's like, what's going on? You were screaming like something was attacking you and you were just going crazy. And so he gets out of the van, and that's when him and his friends, they notice there's these large claw marks on the side of the van. This van is all tore up like something had been attacking it. And as he looks over at his arm, he could see this long incision on the side of his arm where he felt that thing cut him in his dream. So he said him and his friends, they left and they got out of there. And he said after many years of thinking about that, there have been so many disappearances in that same exact area that it often made him think, did it have anything to do with that experience he had that night?
Let's read a scary story. Welcome to the Creepy Cozy Cottage where creepy and cozy meet. So grab a plushie and get cozy because it's creepy cozy time at the Creepy Cozy Cottage. As always, Francesca says hi. The night shift at the gas station was always the same. Coffee, silence, trucks passing by on the road. Until that night when the bell above the door rang and a girl walked inside. She was dirty and shaking. She kept looking over her shoulder. I immediately stopped what I was doing and went over to her. Are you okay? The girl paused for a moment. Then she slowly nodded. Yeah. She just stood there between the shelves for a while. Then she grabbed a small bottle of water from the fridge and a chocolate bar. She placed them on the counter. I noticed her hands were trembling. I don't know what happened to you, but are you sure you're okay? She only nodded again. Yeah, I'm okay, now. I scanned her items, but I still couldn't stop myself from asking. You look scared. The girl lowered her eyes. On my way here, I ran into a man. He had tattoos all over his face. I think he was trying to drag me into his car. I stopped scanning and looked at her. Do you want me to call the police? The girl shook her head. No, I can handle it. I handed her the receipt. Are you sure? You really don't look like you're in a state where I'd feel comfortable leaving you alone. The girl smiled slightly for the first time. I'll be okay. It was scary, but it happened a few hours ago. I think I'm safe now. I said, okay, but can I at least give you my number just so you can text me and let me know you're okay? She looked at me, then took the phone number I had quickly written down, along with the water and the chocolate bar, and left. Time passed. I almost forgot about her. Every now and then, someone came in to get gas. Someone bought coffee or cigarettes. It was just another ordinary night shift. Almost 2 hours passed, and then the doorbell rang. I looked up. My heart stopped for a moment. A man with a tattooed face walked inside, exactly like the one she had described. For a moment, I just stared. I couldn't take my eyes off of him. As if he noticed me watching him, he gave me a brief smile. Then he walked over to the drink aisle. He grabbed an energy drink and slowly walked up to the counter. 1 pack of cigarettes, the blue ones, please. His voice was calm, almost disturbingly normal. My hands started shaking as I scanned his purchase. Is something wrong? He asked. You look a little pale. I said, just a long shift. He nodded and paid, wished me a good evening, and left. I didn't breathe properly again until the door closed behind him. But when I looked outside, his car was still parked there. The lights were off, and he was sitting behind the wheel, like he was waiting for something. Suddenly, I felt completely alone. I grabbed my phone. I texted Lucas, hey, can you pick me up after my shift? The reply came almost instantly. Sure, what's going on? I thought for a moment about what to write. Then I just typed, there's a weird guy here. Maybe I'm overreacting, but I have a really bad feeling about him. I don't want to walk to the parking lot alone. This time, the reply came almost immediately. Sure, wait for me. I'll be there in a few minutes. I looked at the clock. There were only a few minutes left till the end of my shift. Finally, I could breathe again. A new message appeared on my screen. Lucas, I'm around the corner. I let out a sigh of relief. I didn't even realize how tense I'd been until I saw that message. My shift was over. I checked the gas station one more time, turned off the lights, grabbed my keys, and took one last look outside. The parking lot was empty, or at least, I thought it was. I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face. I turned around, locked the door, the key turned in the lock. The click suddenly sounded louder than usual. I put the keys in my pocket and took my first step towards the cars. Were you waiting for someone? I froze. I recognized that voice. Slowly, I turned around, and the man was standing there, the tattooed man. I didn't know where he'd been the whole time. I didn't know how long he'd been watching me. I only knew one thing. I was outside, and the gas station behind me was locked. I said, leave me alone. I tried to make my voice sound firm, but it didn't. He smiled. You don't have to be afraid, he said. I took a step back, and that's when I realized there was no one else in the parking lot. Lucas wasn't there yet. Leave me alone, I said again. This time he didn't smile. His expression changed. I took another step back, and then he moved, faster than I expected. He grabbed my arm and pulled me towards him. Let go of me, I said. His other hand covered my mouth. My heart started pounding so hard that I could barely hear anything else. I tried to scream, pull away, but he was stronger. I won't hurt you if you cooperate, he said. And in that moment, I thought of the girl and how she had escaped. But I wouldn't make it out. And then I heard, hey! The man froze. His hand slowly slipped away from my face. Lucas was standing in the parking lot. I don't know how quickly he got there. I only saw the look on his face. I'd never seen him like that before. Let her go. The man turned around, and for the first time he looked uncertain. Lucas lunged at him before I could say anything. The man let go of me, and I collapsed on the ground. I heard shouting, the sounds of blows. For several seconds, I just sat there, unable to move. Then Lucas got the man to the ground and held him there until the police arrived. A few minutes later, blue lights appeared in the parking lot. The police officers moved the man aside and started asking what happened. I just stood there, still shaking. One of the officers turned toward a car parked nearby. When he got closer to it, he stopped for a moment, like something had caught his attention. Then he covered his nose and grabbed his radio. I need backup. Nobody said anything. I just watched as he walked towards the trunk. What's going on? I asked. Nobody answered me. And then I saw his face. That expression. The one that told me everything before he even said a word. Stay back. That sentence immediately caught my attention. What's happening? I asked. The officer turned around. Miss, please stay there. I nodded, but I didn't listen. I don't know why. Maybe because deep down I already knew it wasn't going to be anything good. Slowly I walked towards the car. Miss, I told you to stay back. His voice sounded stricter this time, but I kept walking. And suddenly I understood why the officer looked that way. I stopped a few steps away from the car. The officer had left the trunk open, and I looked inside. I wish I hadn't, because inside was her, the girl who had been standing in front of me behind the counter just a few hours earlier. The girl who told me that she had met a man with a tattooed face. The girl who left with a bottle of water and a chocolate bar in her hand. Beside her was an empty bottle and the wrapper from the chocolate bar, the same one I had sold her. Later, I learned her name was Sarah. They had been searching for her for several days. Let me know what you think, and if you have any scary stories of your own you'd like me to read, just send me a DM.
Let's read a scary Reddit story. I am currently job searching, which means I have had a lot of time to read scary stories on Reddit, so I'm gonna read you some of the scariest stories I've come across. This week's theme is Louisiana scary stories because that's my home state, and Louisiana is haunted as fuck. This one's a long one, so get comfortable. As a former paramedic/firefighter, I posted this in the EMS sub, so I will just copy and paste. This is one of the most disturbing and creepiest calls I have ever been to. You can Google the area, Frenchtown Railroad Underpass, Baton Rouge, or Central. This event did not take place at the underpass itself, but it was close enough to it that there was no doubt in our mind it involved that area. One late evening working the EMS unit, my partner and I responded with the Sheriff's Department and Fire Department to a report of a man down on the side of the railroad tracks in a wooded area approximately 500 yards from the nearest access road. A railroad employee was doing a safety check of the tracks and noticed this man about 6 to 8 feet down the embankment of the tracks. We all had to park our units on the nearest road and walk with all of the equipment down to where the patient was. When we got to him, he had no signs of life. Flat line on the EKG along with fixed and dilated pupils. He looked to be 30 to 35 years old. We did a little more checking and he had no visible signs of any type of trauma or injury. The body was not yet cold and there wasn't rigor yet, so he hadn't been dead too long. We don't see anything on the body that showed signs of an overdose, and we feel no broken bones. We checked in his ears, nose, and mouth, but found nothing out of the ordinary. No marks around his neck where he would have been strangled, and his trachea was intact. The railroad employees said a train hadn't passed in the last 8 hours, so that ruled out getting hit by or falling off a train. It is extremely rare for someone at that age to just drop dead, so we start searching the general vicinity, which is all wooded area, hoping to find anything out of the ordinary. But all we find is a makeshift tent/campsite where the guy apparently was living. We found no medications or anything out of the ordinary. We are not too far from an area where everyone, not just public safety personnel, but also everyone who lives in the area, believes or has heard rumors that the area is haunted. There are drawings and leftovers from apparent satanic worshiping that takes place at night. Even though all of us on the scene, except one rookie firefighter, knew about the rumors, none of us had actually seen, experienced, or in fact knew anyone that had any kind of first-hand experience with something weird happening. While there was still some daylight left when we arrived, it was now past dusk and about total darkness. We were all walking around just hanging by the body, waiting for the funeral home to show up and bring the body to the morgue for an autopsy. There was my partner, myself, a paramedic, 4 firefighters, and 2 sheriff deputies. Then, the weird, strange, spooky shit started happening. A few of us heard what sounded like many people whispering, but it wasn't from any specific direction, and you couldn't make out what was being said. A couple of the guys didn't hear it and thought we were trying to mess with them. Then, the whispering noises stopped, and the people on the scene that hadn't heard the whispering started hearing what they all described as children laughing, but it surrounded them, not coming from any specific direction. This went on back and forth for about 10 to 15 minutes while we were waiting and standing next to the body. One of the deputies on the scene told their dispatcher to tell the funeral home to step it up and get out there ASAP. When the 2 guys from the funeral home finally showed up, the noise of their gurney on the rail bed and them talking basically killed the strange noises. We cleared the scene and my partner wanted to talk about what had happened while heading back to the station. I told him no, because in my mind I was still trying to work out a logical explanation for it. The next morning, both me and my partner went to the morgue to speak with the coroner and find out the cause of death. We've done this a few times before when the autopsy was complete, when we weren't sure of what actually caused the patient's death, which did not happen often. The first thing the assistant coroner commented was that it must have been a very messy and bloody scene. Me and my partner looked at him kind of strange and asked what he was talking about. The scene was clean. There was no blood. He turned a little pale and said that it just added to his confusion because the body was completely drained of blood. He said there were no marks anywhere on the body he could find where blood could have been drained out. He also said he was by himself doing the autopsy and had a weird experience but refused to tell us what happened. To this day, we still have never learned the actual cause of death of this man or have been able to explain the whispering and evil laughing. This story really freaks me out because there have always been myths and rumors and legends about vampires in Louisiana, but the fact that this guy was completely drained of blood and there was no blood on the crime scene just really freaks me out. But yeah, have you ever experienced anything strange in Louisiana? And let me know if you want to hear any more Reddit scary stories. Bye.
Hi everyone. I hope this video doesn't find you at bedtime because guess what I'm about to do? I'm about to read you a spooky, scary story off of Reddit. My sister and then 4-year-old niece moved into a townhouse apartment complex. Niece is 14 now and still vividly remembers this. Ran into my sister's room not long after, screaming about the man in her room yelling at her. My sister jumps out of bed and searches around for anything or anyone out of place. Finds nothing. Doors and windows still locked. Happens a couple more times over the next few nights. Niece doesn't want to sleep there, won't go into her room, etc. So my sister is chatting with one of the other moms at the complex playground one day, and the other lady mentions how creepy that is, considering the guy that overdosed in that apartment a few years back. Apparently, his son's room is now my niece's room. So my mom did some digging and found the guy's name, which led to his obituary. Pulled up the picture from the obituary and called my niece into the computer room. She got a half a step into the room when she saw the photo on the monitor and ran out screaming about the man. Have absolutely no explanation as to how she recognized this guy's picture. Spooky. What would you do? If you move in somewhere and your kid is screaming about somebody and then you actually find a little bit of evidence that what they are scared of might be true, what do you do? Are you moving? Are you staying? What are you doing? Let me know.
Closet buzzing led me back to the day I found my aunt dead. Inside the box, dead toys moved with no batteries. Hey there, welcome back to Pink Hair Ain't Scared. Let's dive in to another scary story. I lived in the same town as my aunt for over 50 years. I would go and visit her often. We would sit out on her patio, and I would enjoy my time with her as she told me many family stories. We were very close and would talk about anything and everything. My aunt had been a widower for many years and had never dated after the death of her husband. She was very open and a free spirit. During one of our conversations, my aunt confided that she was interested in purchasing an adult toy that she could use in her bedroom. She knew that I would be the one to discuss this because for over a decade back in the late 80s, I worked for a company that sent me out to do intimate parties in the comfort of people's homes. It was a very popular idea, and much like Tupperware parties, but with romantic items for couples and solos. I told my aunt that I would find and purchase the perfect item for her, which I did. I would say it was 1 week later, when I planned a visit to my aunt's house to deliver her purchase. We did not go into any details about this, but my aunt did make it very clear to me that if anything ever happened to her, I was to find this toy and destroy it. I agreed, and we never really spoke of this again. It was now COVID time, and I had not gone to visit my aunt per her request. She was very fearful of the COVID pandemic. We spoke on the phone a number of times. During one of our conversations, she told me that she had not been feeling well, and her doctor offered a video call, but she had no way to do this, and asked if perhaps I could come over and set up the call on my iPhone. I told her that I would. The day came to make this call, and I headed over to my aunt's. She had asked that I come around the back to the patio and wait for her at the table. I got there and went around and set up. She never came out. I waited maybe 10 minutes until I went to her patio door and slid it open. The television was on loudly, so I called out to her. There was no answer. I stepped inside and noticed a motionless body on the couch. It was my aunt. She had passed away. I grabbed her house phone and dialed 911. The paramedics came but could offer her no help. I made sure her house was locked up and followed to the hospital. There was nothing I could do, but I remember my pact with her about the toy. I had her house key, and later that night, I went back and found the item inside of a shoebox in her nightstand. I wrapped the box in plastic bags and took it to her trash bin. As I was leaving her room holding the box, I lifted it up and told her that I was doing as I promised. The following weeks were busy with planning and family visits. We would all get together at the aunt's house to sort through and make all the final arrangements. That chapter closed. Months later, when I was home alone and relaxing, I heard a faint buzzing sound coming from down the hallway. I got up off the couch and followed the sound. It was coming from the top shelf of my closet. The sound was familiar and a steady buzzing. I reached up high in my closet and moved things over until I reached a box. It was an old box that was falling apart and held my old party display bedroom toys. I did not know or even remember why I held on to these old broken display toys. They did not have batteries, nor would they work, even if they were loaded. They were all buzzing and vibrating on full speed. I took them out one by one, and when I switched off the buttons, they stopped. I stood in my room and laughed. I know my aunt came to say hello with a loud buzz. I know she appreciated that I kept my promise.
Hi everybody, welcome back to my series, A Little Scary Story. It's been a long time since I've sat down to tell you an original ghost story from one of my followers, but I hope that this creepy one will be well worth the wait. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar, in addition to talking about stranger things, as well as my own paranormal experiences living in these haunted houses and working in these haunted houses, I also have the honor and the privilege of telling you ghost stories from people all around the world. Now here, all of the ghost stories are completely true, and also they are original. We don't steal other people's content. We don't regurgitate other people's stories. No. We want to be all original here. Now this particular story comes from a young woman named Mia, who's all the way over in the UK. Mia lives in the Doncaster area, and her exact words to me were, "If you come and visit the UK, I will come to you. Please don't come to me." She said that the area that she lives in is a little bit dodgy, for better or for worse, and it has a long history. This particular region was established in 72 AD, and in certain parts of it, it is known for being the site of a witch trial in which 12 witches were burned at the stake. Now, the question on mine and Mia's minds as we were exchanging all of our information and stories is, are these things happening because of the area that she lives in and its history? Or is she bringing home ghosts from work? All of this really started one afternoon at Mia's house. It was just before tea time, and she was down in the living room relaxing and having some time for herself. All of a sudden, she heard really heavy footsteps. She thought for her second that maybe it was her dad, but there was something about them that was just a little bit different. Now, at the top of her stairs, they have different sets of drawers, and one drawer in particular has sort of become the family's junk drawer, for lack of a better term. This particular drawer has a certain type of handle, a knob on it, and it's one of those sort of like flicky ones, so whenever you go to pull it, it makes it kind of a sound. In addition to that, it's an old drawer, so when you pull it open, it goes a whole symphony. Inside of that particular drawer are some coins. There's some very, very old coins that belong to Mia's grandparents. Both of her grandparents were avid coin collectors. But it also has some spare change in it. And it's not uncommon for someone to come by and grab a little spare change to run over to the convenience store and get a snack. She heard these footsteps, and they were just ever so slightly off. It could have been her dad, but it wasn't his particular pace. It wasn't his particular cadence. And as far as she knew, her mom was at work and her dad was across town. She heard the drawer open. She heard the coins being moved around and sort of played with in the drawer. So she figured, my dad must be home. She went upstairs to greet him, to find nobody. She picked up her phone, called her dad, and sure enough, he was on the other side of town. Now, he's not a trickster. She said that her parents are wonderful. She's got a good relationship with them, but they're not really pranksters. It's just not in their nature. So, who was that? Now, a couple weeks later, Mia woke up to find 3 coins perfectly lined up right next to her pillow. When she told her mother about this, her mother said that she had seen an episode of UK's Most Haunted, I think is what it's called, and that other people had reported much the same, waking up to coins perfectly lined up on their nightstand, perfectly lined up next to their pillow, perfectly lined up on their kitchen counter. How is that possible? Now, the only other clue she has is when she turned over the coins, they were all from 1972, which was the end of the war. Something to think about. Now, it's not only Mia's house that's haunted. Unfortunately, her cousin, who now lives on the other side of town in Doncaster as well, also has a haunted house. And Mia stayed there one evening and has essentially never really gone back. Her aunt and uncle and cousin had purchased this home, and that was the one that was specifically in the town where those 12 witches were burned at the stake. And they had asked her if she would house sit for them, as well as doing a little pet sitting. Mia said that when you are in that house, it's eerie, but at nighttime when the lights are out, the house just feels wrong. It feels like the house doesn't want you there. She didn't sleep a wink that night. She ended up taking their dog back to her house and just waiting there for them to come and pick it up when they were done with vacation. After that, once the family actually got into the house and got a little bit more settled, there were a great number of things that started happening. Her cousin kept having a dream about a man dressed all in black. They would come and stand over her bed. She would ask him to leave, and he would leave, but only her bedroom. He would otherwise stay in the house. What followed was pictures being torn off the wall, not falling off the wall, literally like ripping the nails out on their way down. Pictures torn off the walls. Clocks would also fly off of the mantle, off of the walls, wherever they were put. And there was one particular instance where they were all home when all of a sudden a chair got pulled away from where it was in the living room and brought over to their jukebox. Now, Mia and her mother both work at one of the oldest mansions in the UK. It is called Wentworth Woodhouse. Now, this particular place sits on a total of 50 acres of land, and the house itself has architecture from the 1720s to the 1890s and has over 300 rooms. One night, Mia's mother was working the night shift, so it was her job to shut down a particular part of the house for the evening. As she approached the kitchen area, she heard people talking and servants' bells ringing at the top of the stairs. Now, the room at the top of the stairs used to be a nursery, and that was also a place where people who were disabled were kept. She walked to the top of the stairs to figure out what was going on and tried to push open the door, but it was locked, or so she thought. She told her daughter, Mia, what had happened, and they both went to a maintenance man that they're friends with. He informed them that that door actually is not lockable, and that it certainly is not lockable from the other side because it was a nursery. It's where children and disabled people used to be. He said that the only way to close the door is from the little slide latch, but again, because it's so old, it's not built to be locked. When she and her mother returned to that door, they went and the door opened. No issue, which begs the question, who was holding it shut from the other side? Yeah, hi, Cupsy. Yeah, Cupsy does not like this story. Do you feel scared? Or are you looking for treats? Yeah. Anyways, Mia, thank you so much for sending me this story. I would love to hear feedback from everybody else in the comments section as to what you think could be going on here. Is it the land? Is it the building? Are these all different things? Because what I'm learning from all of you is that the paranormal is kind of like a revolving door. You get rid of one and 3 more show up. Now, additionally, if you have an experience of your own or a story that you heard from a friend or family member that you would like for me to retell, there's 3 different ways that you can submit. You can join me anonymously at my link tree in my profile. I have a little paragraph where you can just submit everything, no contact information required. You can email me, littlesmallandco@gmail.com, or you can DM me here. I want to thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for your time. I can't wait to hear what all of you think is really going on in Doncaster. Thanks so much. I'll talk to you later.
You cannot convince me that this woman did this to herself. When 27-year-old Ellen Greenberg was found dead on her kitchen floor with a knife still lodged in her chest and 10 wounds to the back of her own head and neck, the ruling was self-elimination. On the day of her death, January 26, 2011, Ellen's fiancé, Sam Goldberg, reported that he left their shared apartment at 4:45 p.m. to go use the apartment complex's gym. He then says that he returned to their apartment about an hour later to find that the door was locked. And by 6:30, after banging on the door, texting and calling Ellen and receiving no response, Sam forced entry into the apartment by breaking the lock. And that's when he found Ellen lying unresponsive on the kitchen floor with a knife in her chest, and he calls 911.
Oh my God, she stabbed herself.
Where?
She found a knife. Oh no, her knife's sticking out.
What?
There's a knife sticking out of her heart.
On the call, he blatantly says that Ellen had stabbed herself or fell on a knife. A closer examination would reveal that Ellen had 20 stab wounds and 11 different bruises on her body that were all in various stages of healing. The medical examiner who performed her autopsy initially ruled her death a homicide, but for whatever reason, after several closed-door meetings with police and prosecutors, that ruling was soon changed to self-elimination. Investigators also spoke to Ellen's psychiatrist, who told them that she had never expressed thoughts of self-harm, but only suffered from acute anxiety due to normal stress from work. But the rationale used by the chief medical examiner to justify the change from homicide to a self-elimination was that Ellen must have experienced a sudden burst of frantic energy driven by her anxiety over some school grades that she had to submit that day, and then she must have just done this to herself. But there was no note left behind at the scene, and nothing on her computer indicating that she planned on taking her own life. And more than 15 years later, the case still remains a self-elimination, but Ellen's family still believes that investigators got it wrong, and I would have to agree.
If someone tapped on your window at 3 a.m., would you look? Scary story time. This happened when I was around 13 or 14, so some of the details are a little fuzzy, but it's one of those memories that randomly pops into my head and makes me uncomfortable. I lived with my mom and younger sister at the time, and my bedroom faced the backyard. Nothing strange had ever happened there before, so I never thought much about leaving the curtains slightly open at night. One night, I woke up for no real reason. I remember checking the clock beside my bed, and it was just after 3 a.m. I wasn't scared or anything, just annoyed that I had woken up. As I rolled over to go back to sleep, I noticed someone standing outside my window. At first, I honestly thought it was my mom because the figure wasn't moving. I sat up and stared for a few seconds before realizing the person was way too tall. The top of its head was almost level with the top of the window frame, which should have been impossible. I completely froze. I didn't scream or move because I was convinced that if it knew I'd seen it, something bad would happen. After what felt like forever, it slowly raised one hand and tapped on the glass 3 times. Not hard, just enough for me to hear it. Then it stayed completely still again. I pulled the blanket over my head like a little kid and stayed there until I eventually fell asleep without even realizing it. The next morning, I ran outside expecting to find footprints since it had rained earlier that evening. There wasn't a single mark anywhere beneath my window. I told my mom what had happened, and she brushed it off as a nightmare. The weird part is that a few years later, while we were talking about creepy experiences, she casually mentioned hearing 3 knocks outside her bedroom window that same night. She assumed it was an animal and never bothered looking. So do you think this was a simple nightmare? Or do you think something or someone was really outside that window? And that's the end of the story.
You got your late night snack? This is Last Thread Before Bed, episode 37. This is a little series where I read scary stories from Reddit before I go to bed, and my ass tries not to get nightmares. So boom, let's get into it. So tonight's story is on the subreddit Real Ghost Stories thread from user formal-pen-3239. For context, I, male 18, just started a new job at a hospital, and there was one building built in 1867 that I got to explore recently, with beautiful architecture and creepy hallways. So I asked about if any of the staff had stories, and I had 3 good ones from a member of staff. Let's call him Dave. Story 1. So one night in this building, the security break box was broken, so one of the security team members came down to check it out. He then called Dave to come and fix it. When Dave got there, the security guy was down in the car park and nowhere near the back entrance where the repairs were needed. Dave spoke to the guy who refused to go close to the building with him, so he went by himself. Now, why did he refuse to go? I'm gonna need some more context on that. As he was fixing the security break box, he heard some small tapping noises, as if someone was throwing marbles or small stones at a brick wall. Sorry, if you can hear my dog, she's going to town with her bone. Dave shouted down to the security guard, "Stop fucking about." I think he meant to say stop fucking around. And the guard replied that he wasn't doing anything, so Dave just carried on and again heard the tapping noises the entire time, not seeing any rocks lading or hitting any walls around him. I think there's a little typos in this story, but we're just gonna rock with it. When he finished, he went back down to the security guard, and the guard asked what he was talking about earlier, and Dave just said that he thought the guy was fucking about, and to that the guard said, "Did you hear rocks being thrown at you?" And Dave said yeah, and then the guard said, "That's why I'm fucking down here." This specific experience has been told by a lot of the staff. Story number 2. In this building, there is a basement, because of course there is, that has open stairs that you go down, and there's a long hallway at the bottom of the stairs with some pipes and other old things that were important to keep this place running. One night, Dave was down there with another colleague, and they were walking towards the end of this hallway, and Dave sees a dark, shadowy figure quickly move at the end of the hallway. And he just brushed it off to being a trick of the light and or something psychological, and then his colleague asked him if he had seen it, to which Dave said, "Seen what?" The other guy that was there described the shadow figure at the end of the hallway in the same space and stated that he had seen it a few times but thought it was just his shadow. Story 3. Another night, Dave and another staff member were working up in the attic with only their head torches, and Dave's colleague was mucking about and asked, "If there are any spirits around, give us a sign." I don't know, guys. Immediately there was a loud crash from across the attic, and so they whipped their heads round to look at where it came from. There was nothing there at all. Nothing that could have caused the crash. No boxes that could have fallen, no humans, and no animals. Nothing to explain the crash, to which the other staff member said, "Well, fuck. I think I've said the wrong thing." Most employees will not go into that building alone or anywhere near it at night. Even security guards will miss it off their checks at night because they're so scared to go near it. This doesn't mean nobody checks in. There are plenty of cameras around this area. Now, taking in all this info and more, would be dumb to ask if someone would let me go in at night to experience this for myself, to see if there are any truth to these stories of the ghost that haunts at night. Probably. Am I still going to ask if it's possible? Absolutely. Those were some really good stories. I love abandoned, haunted hospital kinds of stories, especially like night shift stories. Those are the best. I wasn't so fluent with my speech in this one because there was a few typos in this, but forgive me, y'all. I don't pre-read these stories. I'll just glaze over them. So I don't take the time to proofread or anything like that. I just try to make my videos as authentic as possible. Follow for more scary stories.
Okay, so two things. First of all, probably make yourself comfortable because I think we're going to be here for a while. And second of all, I tried my best to collect this information to try and make it as easy to understand as possible. So hopefully I don't lose you guys because there is a ton of information, but I tried my best and I guess we'll see how I do. David Anthony Burke, otherwise known as singer-songwriter David, is facing first-degree murder, continuous of a child under the age of 14 and unlawful mutilation of human remain charges on connection to the tragic brutal death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez, whose remains were found back in September of 2025. The prosecution is also pursuing special circumstances. One of those special circumstances in this case is murder for financial gain. And what that means is that if convicted on first-degree murder for financial gain, David Anthony Burke could potentially be facing the death penalty. The preliminary hearing for this case took place all of last week, beginning Monday, July 21st and ending just yesterday, Monday, July 28th. And as you guys know, because we have talked about this before, the point of a preliminary hearing is just to determine whether or not there is sufficient evidence for a case to proceed to trial. So it's either concluded that yes, there is, or no, there isn't. We now know that a judge ruled that yes, there is. So this case is now officially going to proceed to trial. David has pleaded not guilty to all three charges, and as of today, no trial date has been set. However, apart from ruling that this is going to go to trial, a preliminary hearing also gives us a better idea of what we can expect to come from both sides, the prosecution and the defense. So we're going to break that down, and I'm going to tell you the new information that came to light last week. And again, I tried my best to format this in a way that's hopefully not confusing. So the first day of the preliminary hearing begins, and David is brought into the courtroom. He's looking like a completely different version of him than the public is used to seeing. He was described to have been looking disheveled, unshaven, overall just not as well groomed or put together as he usually has been in the past. He's wearing the orange jumpsuit. He's sitting at the defense table with his attorneys, and the judge allowed for his handcuffs to be removed, but ruled that he would have to keep his waist and his feet shackled. A criminalist who is an LAPD staff member also testified that booking photos revealed that David did have, or rather does have, a tattoo of the name Celeste on his left ring finger. And his overall demeanor in the courtroom was described to be calm and largely expressionless throughout the proceedings. There were certain times throughout the hearings that he did seem to perk up a little bit more, pay closer attention, and look a little bit more focused, but overall he really showed no visible reaction through a lot of it, most of it. Celeste's parents were also in the courtroom at the times in which they could be, and I say that because at some points they did choose to step out or not attend at all during certain times when it was just too much for them to handle. For example, at times when the medical examiner testified and when graphic autopsy photographs were shown, her parents made the decision to step out because it was too hard for them to have to sit there and look at that. So the prosecution believes that Celeste's death was premeditated and a motive-driven murder. Prosecutors allege that David killed Celeste after she threatened to expose details about the relationship before the release of his album, which would have damaged his lucrative career as a rising music star. Because Celeste was underage, the two of them were romantically involved, and they believe that David knew that, and that he knew that if Celeste was to expose their relationship, his career would be over. Remember, she was 14 years old at the time of her death, and David was 21 years old at the time of his arrest in April of 2026. So that is what the prosecution is going to argue in court, that David had a motive, which was protecting his career, and that he murdered Celeste to stop her from ruining his career. We're going to go into details on this later, but they believe that David and Celeste got in an argument allegedly about David's relationship with other women before David then sent a car to go and pick her up from her hometown of Lake Elsinore in California, which was around 80 miles away from his house in LA. The two of them were allegedly exchanging messages until she arrived at his house, and then her phone went dead. That's when prosecutors believe that he fatally stabbed her. Then, in the weeks that followed, they argue that David dismembered her body by placing her body in an inflatable pool in which he cut off her limbs and ultimately got rid of her remains by stuffing them into a large black zippered body bag and inside of his Tesla's trunk. And to prove that, they are building their case around several different things, one being the physical evidence, which is DNA taken from blood found at his home, in his garage, on mats on the floor, on garbage bags, on a crumbled up tarp, on the blue inflatable pool, in the back of the trunk, and on the third row seat of his car. That was all a match to Celeste. Then there's the overwhelming odor inside of his Tesla, multiple air fresheners placed inside of the car to cover up that smell, 11 air fresheners to be exact, a receipt showing a purchase of a shovel the day after the murder is believed to have occurred, and the biggest physical evidence, of course, being Celeste's dismembered body found in the trunk of his car. 2, you have the premeditation evidence, so the chainsaws and a burn box purchased under fake names on Amazon, suggesting that David planned the disposal of her body in advance rather than acting in a moment of impulse. 3rd, the digital evidence, explicit text messages between David and Celeste, including messages from the night that prosecutors believe that she was killed, and explicit images found on his phone. That digital evidence is part of what they're also going to be using to help them lay out a relationship timeline, because they really want the jury to understand that David was aware of the fact that Celeste was 14 years old, and to then explain how this quote-unquote relationship progressed to a point in which David felt like she could have ruined his career if she was to expose the details of their relationship, because the relationship, if you can even call it that, would be illegal under California law on multiple grounds. Not only because the age of consent in California is 18 years old and she was 14, but also because under California law, any physical relationship between an adult and a child immediately falls into child SA. Even if there is consent from both parties, legally speaking, that would be enough for a child SA charge. In the hearing, prosecutors also laid out a years-long account of interactions between David and Celeste. They argued that David met Celeste when she was only 11 years old and then began a physical relationship with her when she was at least 13 years old, but maybe even 12. The details of this age gap are important for a lot of reasons, not only because they support what they are saying was his motive, but also because they are the direct cause for one of his charges, which is continuous essay of a child under the age of 14. Okay, so then on the other side, you have the defense. David's defense team is maintaining his innocence, claiming that no physical witnesses or security cameras captured Celeste entering David's house on the night that she was presumably murdered. They are also going to be arguing that her family, her parents, were aware of this relationship and they were aware of the age gap. And they are going to argue that the text messages only demonstrate a jealous dispute rather than a homicidal motive. Finally, from the hearing, it also sounds like the defense is going to aggressively challenge the prosecution's evidence handling. So the defense is not saying that David and Celeste did not know each other, but their argument is based more so on challenging what kind of relationship they had, as well as the alleged motive and the strength of the physical evidence linking him to the specific act of ending her life. So as far as what kind of relationship they had, in the hearing, a detective by the name of Corey Farrell testified that their relationship was very much physical. That detective spent some time on the stand describing photograph after photograph of what investigators believe to be David performing certain acts on Celeste. There were allegedly more than 36 photos of the two of them that, quote, could not be shown in court because they depicted explicit SA. So they were too graphic to be shown, which is why the police detective described them one by one. And during that, Celeste's mom began crying and her father was just looking down to the ground. Then a deputy district attorney went over to the mom to try and comfort her, and then both of her parents got up and left the room. That detective also described text messages between them in which they talked about birth control, pregnancy, and terminating a pregnancy when Celeste would have been 13 years old and David would have been 19 years old. From those messages, we now know that Celeste had been pregnant and had terminated a pregnancy throughout the time that they were together. And more than a year before she was killed, there were text messages shown from June of 2024 in which Celeste texted David, quote, "What if the first abortion didn't work?" She later then expressed regret in going through with the termination, writing, quote, "I would do anything to have it back." That same month, there was a text from David to Celeste that read, quote, "Let's let this abortion be the last one until we have the real one." Then there were messages from January of 2024 in which David was apologizing for, quote, putting her through this, and in which Celeste responded by saying, quote, "It's okay. Neither of us are capable of watching and taking care of the baby. It's for the best, no?" In another message, David then texted Celeste, quote, "My mother always told me to ask this question if I was ever in this situation. It is mine, right?" And Celeste replied with, "Of course it's yours, David." In another exchange, Celeste asked David if anyone knew that they were actively in an intimate physical relationship, to which David responded by saying, quote, "Nope, and I want to keep it that way until we are married." From other messages, it was also confirmed that their relationship, and I hate calling it a relationship because she was a child, but messages showed arguments between them that confirmed that they did break up on numerous different occasions. And the messages showed that Celeste was finding it really
what's going on around
hard to be in this quote-unquote relationship because she wanted more out of David that David was not willing to give her. It sounds like her opinion was that David only wanted to be with her for her body and not for who she actually was as a person. In a text during an argument from March of 2025, Celeste texted David saying, quote, "All we do is hang out and have I don't want anything to do with you in person anymore if I'm going to try and move on. And in another one of those conversations, Celeste was upset, and David's way of telling her to relax, I guess, was saying that she was acting like they were going through their first breakup when in reality it was their 8th time breaking up. More messages showed more arguments, and they showed that their relationship was starting to go downhill because their arguments were just getting more and more frequent. But they also did show times in which it seemed like the two of them were in a good place. David telling Celeste that he loved her, talking about getting married in Italy and talking about moving in together, which they referred to as Operation Awesome. And I don't mean to say that they were in a good place because that was not a good place to be in. Celeste should have never been involved with him to begin with. But I'm kind of more saying it from her point of view, given that she was only 14 years old, and in her head she was maybe thinking that they were in a good place because she couldn't see him for what he really was, which what he really is a horrible person. But anyway, those pictures and texts, by the way, which included over 8,000 text messages, were recovered from his iPhone that was taken during a search of his home. So police detective Corey Farrell was the one who testified in regards to a lot of the photos and a lot of those text messages. And in the entirety of the hearing, the prosecution called 11 witnesses, and the defense did not call any of their own, but they did cross-examine all of the prosecutions. Another person who testified was Dr. Ho. Dr. Grant Ho is a medical examiner at the LA County Medical Examiner's Office. He performed the autopsy and testified about his findings. That was probably one of the heaviest days, if not the heaviest day in the entire hearing, because everything that he had to say was so incredibly devastating and hard to listen to. And I'm about to go through that, and it is graphic and it's not easy to listen to. So if you don't want to listen to that, or if you don't think that you can, I would probably skip this video. He first stated that he couldn't estimate exactly how long Celeste had been deceased for, nor the exact day that her body was dismembered because of how badly decomposed the body was, saying that it was so badly decomposed that some of it had liquefied. He did state, however, that by the time that her remains were found, it was clear that it had been, quote, at least weeks. And prosecutors believe that Celeste was murdered in April of 2025. Her remains were not found until September 8th of 2025. So that would put the gap between the estimated time of death and the discovery of her remains at approximately 4 to 5 months. On the stand, Dr. Grant Ho was asked whether it was possible that she was killed 5 months before her body was found, and he responded with potentially. He also testified that her arms and legs had been removed using some sort of power tool, and he was able to determine that because of how it was done, describing it to be relatively clean, though he stated that the exact tool could not be determined. 2 fingers were also severed, including one that had a tattoo that read David. One of those fingers to this day has still not yet been found. In his 26-page report, he also mentioned that Celeste died of, quote, multiple penetrating injuries that were caused with objects. And he spent a lot of time on the stand describing 2 key injuries, one to the right of her abdomen that pierced her liver, and another one to the left of the chest. Throughout his testimony, people in the courtroom were audibly gasping when photos of Celeste were put on the screen. Meanwhile, David remained stoic and showed apparently zero emotion. Celeste's parents were not in the courtroom for a lot of the photos because they simply could not be. And again, that same district attorney that I mentioned earlier kept checking in on them, mouthing to them, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And ultimately suggesting that they leave the courtroom entirely because she thought that no parent should ever have to sit through that. Another big testimony came from a man who acted as David's financial manager, as well as another guy who was the senior vice president of finance at Interscope Records, which is the agency that David was signed with. David's financial manager testified that between 2023 and 2025, David brought in more than $10 million in gross earnings, and the senior vice president testified that David's recording deal was worth somewhere between $13 to $19 million. The prosecution using these testimonies to say, look, he had a lot to lose. He already made millions. He was expected to make a lot more. So you can see why, if and when Celeste threatened to expose the relationship and potentially ruin his career, he would have a motive to want to get rid of her before she had the chance to expose anything at all. Now let's talk about the timeline, okay? So in the days leading up to the murder, David and Celeste had been arguing. They had been texting back and forth, arguing about a female that David had formed a relationship with. Celeste was not happy about this, and she allegedly told him that she no longer wanted to be in a relationship with him if he was going to continue his friendship with this other girl. We don't know who this other girl is, nor do we know her age. At one point during their argument, according to David's attorney, Celeste starts to make multiple violent threats and starts threatening to hurt not only herself, but to hurt David as well. She also allegedly said that she was going to, quote, tell her father lies that would end his music career and damage his life. This argument is going on April 22nd of 2025. wife, and then Celeste begins to repeatedly ask if she could see David in person. The following day, April 23rd, they text back and forth about Celeste going over to David's house in the Hollywood Hills to talk in person. And they start arguing again about the same thing around 5 p.m. It sounds like Celeste was asking David to show her something because David asked her why he has to show her everything. And Celeste responds with, quote, "Because I had your embryo in me." David then calls her a car for her to come to his house, and to support that, there is allegedly an Uber receipt showing that David did call a ride from her house to his house at around 8:30 p.m. Like I said, their houses were around 80 miles away from each other, so that's a bit of a drive, okay? Celeste texts David at 10:02 p.m., letting him know that she was almost going to arrive at his house. Then at 10:10 p.m., she asks him to open his door. At 10:10 p.m., David responds by saying that the gate was open and his door was unlocked. Prosecutors believe that very shortly after she arrived, he committed the murder. According to the records, it was about 20 minutes after she allegedly arrived that David then texted Celeste asking where she was, but she never responded. He continued sending several messages throughout the night asking where she was, at one point saying, "Bro, you're scaring me." Prosecutors believe that that was his attempt at pretending that she never actually showed up, and they believe that he started the process of disposing of evidence that same night. According to records, David's phone and car location showed that he left his house that night at around 11:30 p.m. to drive to Santa Barbara. Between the day that the murder is believed to have taken place and the day that her body was found, David allegedly drove again to Santa Barbara twice more. And in the hearing, one detective reviewed cell phone records that supported that exact narrative, showing records that David's Tesla drove from his house in Hollywood Hills to Santa Barbara. A California Highway Patrol officer also testified, stating that on January 7th, so this is now months later, he recovered Celeste's passport card from a worker who had found it along the highway. And those records from David's Tesla track with where that passport was found because his Tesla was near the location where the passport card was recovered. So that would make sense that he somehow left the passport along in the route that he was going, in which he would have taken to dispose of the evidence, if that is what he was doing. And then 2 days after the murder is believed to have taken place, on April 25th of 2025, David's first album was released. He threw an album release party at his house, and then he went on tour. So as of yesterday, Monday, July 28th, the judge ruled that there is enough evidence for this case to move forward and go to trial. We don't know when that is yet, but we do know that there is going to be a trial. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking like, there is an overwhelming amount of evidence against him, how in the world is his defense team going to defend him? The unfortunate truth is that we're not going to know until we do know. I don't think that the defense put up their strongest arguments that they may or may not have at the preliminary hearing, because I wouldn't be surprised if there were certain things that they were holding on to until the actual trial. However, what they did do at the preliminary hearing was try to poke holes in every single thing that the prosecution was saying. For example, they questioned how they preserved the crime scene, pointing out that officers were allowed in the house and walked around before the crime scene investigators could get there. When it came to the phone evidence, the text messages, they argued back, asking how it was decided that that was David's phone, hinting at the fact that it could have been Celeste's phone, although I'm not really sure exactly why that would matter. During a cross-examination, they asked an analyst to see if there was a way to say when or how certain DNA might have arrived on a certain item, to which she responded by saying that that was difficult to know for sure. They also really focused in on the fact that Celeste's body was so badly decomposed that medical examiners simply could not have definitive answers as to what exactly happened to her, down to the exact timing of everything. They argued that, yeah, David could have ordered that Uber for Celeste, but that as of now, there are no witnesses that could 100% confirm that she did make it inside of his house that night. Then also pointing out that it was Celeste's idea to want to meet up in person, not David's, and that David only agreed to meet in person after she quote-unquote demanded it. And they also made sure to point out certain messages that Celeste sent that showed that her mental state was in a very dark place, and that a lot of the time she was upset or she was angry at David. They went as far as to question that if the injuries that she had, the injuries that caused her death, could have been self-inflicted. I'm not lying. They really brought that up, and unfortunately, as insane and unrealistic and ridiculous as it sounds, it is one of those details that is impossible to test for because of the state that her remains were found in. So I don't know what they're going to try and pull. I guess we'll see. But this, yeah, it's so disturbing. A lawyer for Celeste's family has said that the family members will not talk publicly about this case, saying, quote, "There are no words to express the indescribable pain that the family is experiencing." But he did say that her family is relieved by the judge's decision to take this case to trial. I don't really know what to say, to be honest with you. That's all for me today. If I missed anything, please leave it down in the comments. And yeah, thank you for spending time with me today. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.